You swore on your mother's grave, David. You swore. Lisa's voice barely breached a whisper, trembling with a coldness that chilled the humid summer air. The heavy oak door of the manor's solar lay ajar, framing a scene that etched itself into her soul. David, his linen shirt unlaced, scrambled away from the woman entangled with him on the velvet settee. Lisa, please, it is not— Do not insult my intelligence with lies when the truth is bare before me. She cut in, her gaze shifting to the other woman. The stranger was hastily pulling a silken bodice over her shoulders, her face obscured by tumbled dark hair. Hair the exact, impossible shade of Lisa's own. Consider our betrothal broken, Lord David. Before he could reach her, Lisa spun on her heel and vanished into the shadowed corridor, leaving only the echo of her retreating footsteps. The air in Lisa's bedchamber was thick with the scent of dried lavender and the metallic tang of unshed tears. She stood before the polished silver looking-glass, but she saw neither her pale complexion nor the intricate embroidery of her gown. She saw only the image burned into her mind's eye. David's flushed face, the panic in his eyes, and the flash of a ruby ring on the other woman's hand. It was the ring that haunted her most. A square-cut ruby, flanked by seed pearls. The exact twin to the one currently resting heavy and cold in her own jewelry box. The only heirloom left by a mother she never knew. A sharp knock broke her reverie. Lady Lisa? It was Martha, her loyal maidservant, her voice strained. Leave me, Martha, Lisa said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. It sounded hollow, devoid of the vibrant joy that had characterized her just an hour ago. My lady, Lord David is in the courtyard. He refuses to leave. He is demanding an audience. Tell the guards to escort him off the grounds, Lisa commanded, turning away from the glass. If he resists, tell them they have my permission to use force. He is no longer welcome at Oakhaven. Martha hesitated, the heavy wooden door creaking softly. But, my lady, the wedding. The banns have been read. The Duke, your father. My father is in the capital, Martha, and I am the lady of this house in his absence. Lisa's tone brooked no argument. The wedding is cancelled. Now go. As the door clicked shut, the fragile composure Lisa had maintained shattered. She collapsed onto her bed, burying her face in the furs, finally allowing the sobs to tear from her chest. The betrayal was a physical ache, a sharp blade twisting between her ribs. David. Charming, steadfast David, who had wooed her with poetry and promises, who had held her hand under the ancient oak tree and sworn a love eternal. It was all ash now, but beneath the crushing grief lay a cold, hard knot of bewilderment. The woman. She had only seen her for a fleeting moment, a tangle of limbs and dark hair in the dim light of the solar. Yet there had been something unsettlingly familiar about her. The curve of her cheek, the shade of her hair, and that ring. Lisa sat up, wiping her tear-stained face with the back of her hand. She crossed the room to her carved wooden chest, her fingers trembling as she turned the small iron key. Inside, nestled amidst velvet pouches and silk ribbons, lay a small, worn leather box. She opened it. The ruby ring glared back at her, a blood-red eye accusing her of blindness. Her father had given it to her on her 16th birthday, a solemn expression on his usually jovial face. Your mother's, he had said simply. She wished for you to have it when you were of age. He had never spoken of her mother again, and Lisa had learned early on that pressing the subject only brought a dark cloud over Oakhaven. Now, another woman wore the twin to this ring. A woman tangled in the sheets with the man Lisa was to marry. The coincidence was too grotesque to ignore. The logic of it clawed at her mind, demanding attention even as her heart wept. The capital was 3 days' ride away. Her father would not return for a fortnight. She could not stay here, waiting for his wrath or David's relentless apologies. She needed answers, and she would not find them within the suffocating walls of Oakhaven. She needed to find the woman with the ruby ring. Lisa moved with a sudden, decisive energy. She pulled a sturdy wool traveling dress from her armoire, tossing aside the delicate silks meant for her trousseau. She packed a small satchel with provisions from the kitchens, slipping past the sleeping servants like a phantom. Finally, she took the leather box containing the ring and tucked it securely into a hidden pocket of her cloak. By the time the first streaks of dawn painted the eastern sky in bruised hues of purple and gray, Lady Lisa of Oakhaven was gone, leaving only a brief, formal note for Martha on her writing desk. She slipped out through the postern gate, saddled her swiftest mare, and rode into the mist, her heart forged into a weapon of cold, calculating resolve. The road south from Oakhaven was little more than a muddy track, winding through the dense, ancient forest known as the Whispering Woods. The locals avoided it, speaking of bandits and restless spirits, but Lisa cared little for superstitions. It was the fastest route to the neighboring barony of Ethelgard, where David's family held their seat. If he had a mistress, he would have likely kept her close. The journey was arduous. The canopy above was so thick it swallowed the sunlight, leaving the forest floor in perpetual twilight. The air was damp and smelled of decaying leaves and wet earth. Lisa rode in silence, her senses strained, listening to every snap of a twig, every rustle in the undergrowth. The solitude which she usually craved now pressed upon her, magnifying her thoughts. She replayed the scene in the solar endlessly. The betrayal was agonizing, yes, but it was the mystery of the woman that propelled her forward. Who was she? The question pulsed in time with her mare's hoofbeats. Why the ring? On the second day of her journey, the weather turned against her. A cold, driving rain began to fall, turning the track into a treacherous mire. Lisa's cloak, though heavy wool, soon soaked through, chilling her to the bone. She urged her horse forward, squinting through the downpour, searching for any sign of shelter. As dusk approached, she spotted a faint light flickering through the trees. It was a modest hunting lodge, sturdy and low-slung, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. Relief washed over her, mingled with caution. She tied her horse to a sturdy oak, adjusting her cloak to conceal her fine clothing, and approached the door. She knocked, the sound dull against the heavy timber. A moment passed. Then the door swung open to reveal an older woman with a weathered face and sharp, intelligent eyes. "Traveler?" the woman asked, her gaze sweeping over Lisa's bedraggled appearance. "It's a foul night to be on the road." "Indeed it is," Lisa replied, keeping her voice even. "I seek shelter. If you have room, I can pay." The woman stepped aside. "Come in, child. The fire is warm at least." The interior was simple, but clean. A large hearth dominated the room, where a pot bubbled, filling the air with the smell of stew. Lisa removed her cloak, shivering violently as the heat finally reached her. She thanked the woman, introducing herself only as Ilara, a merchant's daughter traveling to Ethelgard. As they shared the simple meal, Lisa carefully guided the conversation. "Have you seen many travelers recently?" The road seemed treacherous. The old woman, who introduced herself as Greta, chuckled dryly. "Not many brave the Whispering Woods, save those who have reason to avoid the main roads. Though, a few days past, a carriage passed through, traveling fast despite the mud." Lisa's heart skipped a beat. "A carriage? Did you see who was inside?" Nay, the curtains were drawn tight, Greta replied, serving another ledellful of stew. But it bore the crest of Ethelgard, that I know. And there were riders with it, armed men. Looked like they were guarding something precious, or someone dangerous. A cold dread coiled in Lisa's stomach. David's family crest. Was it her? Had he sent her away when the truth was discovered? Or was she fleeing something else entirely? Did they say where they were headed? Lisa pressed, trying to keep her tone casual. Greta looked at her thoughtfully. They didn't stop here, child. But they were headed south, towards the coast, towards Blackwood Keep. Blackwood Keep. The name sent a shiver down Lisa's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. It was an ancient, crumbling fortress perched on a treacherous cliff overlooking the sea. It belonged to no one, a ruin long abandoned to the gulls and the salt spray. Why would anyone go there? That night, lying on a pallet near the fire, Lisa could not sleep. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, mimicking the frantic pacing of her thoughts. The carriage, the armed men, Blackwood Keep. The puzzle pieces were jumbled, refusing to form a coherent picture. She traced the outline of the leather box hidden in her cloak. The ruby ring. It felt heavier now, burdened with secrets she was only beginning to uncover. Tomorrow she would ride south. She would follow the carriage to Blackwood Keep. She would find the woman with the twin ring, and she would demand the truth, no matter how much it cost her. The journey to the coast took another grueling day. As Lisa left the whispering woods, the landscape shifted dramatically. The dense trees gave way to scrubby, wind-whipped moors, the air tasting of salt and impending storms. The sky above was a bruised canvas of dark, roiling clouds, mirroring the turmoil within her. By late afternoon, the ruins of Blackwood Keep materialized against the gray horizon. It was a grim structure, its dark stone towers jutting upward like broken teeth against the sky. The sea crashed violently against the cliffs below, a constant, roaring bassline to the whistling wind. Lisa halted her mare at the edge of the woods, observing the keep. There was no sign of the carriage Greta had mentioned. The courtyard was empty, overgrown with weeds and choked with debris. It looked entirely abandoned, a ghost of its former glory. Dismounting, she tied her horse securely in a thicket and approached on foot, keeping low, using the crumbling stone walls for cover. Her heart hammered against her ribs, loud in the eerie silence of the ruins. The air here felt heavy, oppressive, thick with forgotten sorrow. She slipped through a collapsed section of the outer wall, entering the main bailey. The silence was absolute, broken only by the wind and the distant crashing of waves. She moved cautiously, her hand resting on the small dagger strapped to her thigh. A precaution she rarely needed, but was grateful for now. Suddenly, a sound cut through the wind. A horse's whinny, sharp and nervous. Lisa froze, pressing herself flat against a stone pillar. She peered around it. Near the dilapidated stables, partially hidden by a fallen roof, stood a sleek, black courser. It was a magnificent beast, bearing a rich, dark leather saddle, the kind favored by nobility. Someone was here. She crept closer, her footsteps silent on the damp earth. A narrow archway led into the main keep, its heavy wooden doors long rotted away. Taking a deep breath, she slipped inside. The interior was a cavernous ruin, the roof open to the sky in places. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the gloom, casting long, distorted shadows. She moved deliberately, checking every alcove, every shadow. Then, she heard it. Voices, muffled, coming from below. Lisa followed the sound to a stone staircase spiraling down into the darkness. The crypts. The air grew noticeably colder as she descended, smelling of damp stone and old decay. The voices grew clearer, though she still couldn't make out the words. One voice, low and urgent. The other sharper, laced with anger. She reached the bottom of the stairs, peering into the gloom of the crypt. Flickering torchlight illuminated the far end of the long chamber. There, amidst the ancient stone sarcophagi, stood two figures. One was a man, his back to her, cloaked in dark wool. The other was a woman. Lisa's breath hitched in her throat. The torchlight illuminated the woman's face clearly, the dark hair now loose and wild, the sharp, elegant cheekbones, the pale complexion. It was her, the woman from the solar, but it wasn't just the memory of the betrayal that struck Lisa now. It was the impossible, terrifying reality standing before her. As the woman turned slightly, catching the light, Lisa saw her features with devastating clarity. It was like looking into a distorted mirror. The woman wasn't just similar, she was a reflection. Older, perhaps harder, but the resemblance was undeniable. The man turned, and Lisa almost gasped aloud. It wasn't David. It was a stranger, tall and rugged, with a scar slicing across his jaw. He was speaking intensely to the woman, his hand resting urgently on her arm. "Must leave tonight, Alara," the man said, his voice echoing slightly in the crypt. "If they find you here." Alara. Lisa had used that name at the lodge. A common enough name, yet the coincidence sent a jolt through her. The woman, Alara, pulled away from him, her expression fierce. "I will not run forever, Kale. The time for hiding is past. I have the ring. I have proof." She raised her hand. The ruby ring caught the torchlight, flashing like a drop of fresh blood. Lisa stepped out of the shadows. The logic of the situation demanded it, even as her mind screamed in confusion. She could not hide any longer. "I believe," Lisa said, her voice echoing unnaturally loud in the damp crypt, "that you owe me an explanation." Both figures whipped around. Kale's hand dropped instantly to the hilt of a sword at his waist. Alara stared, her eyes widening in profound shock, the bravado vanishing from her face. For a long, agonizing moment, the three of them stood frozen in the flickering light, the silence heavier than the stone above them. Alara's gaze locked onto Lisa's, searching, terrified, and undeniably familiar. "Lisa," Alara breathed, the name sounding like a prayer and a curse simultaneously. Lisa stepped closer, her hand reaching into her cloak, pulling out the small leather box. She snapped it open, revealing the twin ruby ring. "Who are you?" Lisa demanded, her voice trembling slightly despite her resolve. "And why are you wearing my mother's ring?" Alara stared at the twin rings, a single tear escaping to trace a clean path down her dirt-streaked cheek. She looked up at Lisa, her expression crumbling into an agony of long-held secrets. "I am wearing it," Alara said, her voice barely a whisper, "because she was my mother too. I am your sister." The words hung in the damp, frigid air of the crypt, heavy and suffocating. "I am your sister." Lisa stared at the woman, Alara, her mind violently rejecting the information even as her eyes confirmed it. The similarities were too profound to be mere coincidence. The sharp angle of the jaw, the deep, tempestuous shade of their dark hair, the very shape of their eyes. It was as if Lisa were looking at a portrait of herself, painted by an artist who had opted for a harder, more sorrowful brushstroke. "That is impossible," Lisa whispered, the sound barely carrying over the distant, rhythmic thud of the ocean against the cliffs. Her hand gripped the small leather box so tightly, her knuckles turned a translucent white. My mother died giving birth to me. My father... She swallowed the lump of ash in her throat. My father would have told me. Alara let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. It was a brittle, broken noise that echoed off the ancient stone sarcophagi surrounding them. Would he? She asked, her voice laced with a lifetime of bitter poison. Would the great Duke of Oakhaven admit that his firstborn daughter, his true heir, was sent away in the dead of night because the circumstances of her birth were politically inconvenient? Kyle, the rugged stranger, shifted his weight, his hand still resting cautiously on the pommel of his sword. He watched Lisa with guarded, calculating eyes, assessing whether she was a threat or a victim. Alara, we do not have time for this, he murmured, his tone low and urgent. The tide is turning. We must move. No, Lisa said sharply, a sudden, unfamiliar authority threading through her voice. The sheltered lady of Oakhaven was fracturing, revealing a core of tempered steel beneath. She stepped closer to the torchlight, ignoring Kale entirely to focus on the woman who wore her face. You do not get to drop the sky upon my head and then walk away into the dark. If you are my sister, why were you in the solar with a man I was to marry? Was this vengeance? A petty cruelty to punish me for a life you believe I stole? Alara flinched as if struck. The defensive anger in her eyes faltered, replaced by a deep, hollow shame that looked painfully genuine. She looked down at the muddy stone floor, her shoulders slumping beneath her heavy woolen cloak. It was not supposed to be like this, Alara confessed, her voice trembling. She kept her gaze fixed on the ground, unable to meet Lisa's accusing stare. I was raised in the northern convents, a ward of the Silent Sisters. I knew nothing of my lineage until a year ago, when an old nursemaid confessed the truth on her deathbed. She gave me the ring and told me my name. I traveled to the capital to find our father, to demand the place that was rightfully mine. Lisa listened, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The logic of it was terrifyingly sound. The missing gaps in her father's history, the forbidden wing of the manor he never allowed her to enter, the profound sadness that overtook him on her birthday. It all aligned into a terrible, coherent picture. And David? Lisa prompted, the name tasting like copper on her tongue. Alara finally looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Lord David found me in the city. He noticed the resemblance. He was the one who confirmed the nursemaid's story. He told me that our father was a cruel man, that he would never accept me, but that he, David, could help me secure my birthright. A cold dread began to pool in Lisa's stomach. He knew, she breathed, the realization slicing through her like a blade. David knew who you were. He wove a beautiful web, Lisa, Alara said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He promised me the world. He hid me in the neighboring villages, visited me in secret. He told me he was betrothed to a distant cousin of the Duke, a political alliance he was desperate to escape. I swear to you, on our mother's soul, I did not know you were the betrothed. I did not know you were my sister until he smuggled me into Oakhaven that night, and I saw the grand portrait in the main hall. Lisa staggered back a half step, her mind reeling. The betrayal was no longer a simple matter of lust. It was a calculated, labyrinthine manipulation. David had been playing them both. He was marrying Lisa for the public claim to the dukedom, while secretly keeping Alara, the older sister, the true heir, as leverage, or perhaps something much darker. When I saw your portrait, Alara continued, tears finally spilling over her lashes, I realized the monster he truly was. I went to the solar to confront him, to demand he return the ring he had taken from me, to appraise for our flight. He tried to silence me. He pulled me into his arms to keep me from screaming just as the door opened. Just as you walked in, the silence returned, heavier and colder than before. Lisa stared at the twin ring in her hand, then at the one on Alara's finger. The shattered pieces of her life lay scattered on the crypt floor, irreparably broken, before she could process the monumental weight of the truth. A sound echoed from the cavernous ruins above them. It was the unmistakable clatter of armored boots on stone, accompanied by the harsh, booming commands of men who had come with murderous intent. Spread out. Search the perimeter. If she is here, she cannot have gone far. The voice drifting down the spiraling stone staircase was muffled by the wind and the thick walls. But it was distinct enough to send a jolt of pure adrenaline straight to Lisa's heart. It was not the authoritative, booming tenor of her father's guards. It was sharper, younger, laced with a frantic, desperate cruelty. It was David's captain of the guard. Cale moved with the swift, fluid grace of a predator. In a single motion, he had his broadsword drawn, the steel hissing softly against the leather scabbard. He swiftly stepped into the narrow archway at the base of the stairs, pressing his back against the damp stone, listening intently to the commotion above. "How many?" Alara whispered, the color draining entirely from her face. She stepped instinctively toward Kyle, seeking the protective shadow he cast. By the sound of the boots, at least a dozen. Kyle replied, his voice a tight, controlled rasp. His dark eyes flicked toward Lisa. "Are they your father's men? Did you lead them here?" "My father is in the capital," Lisa hissed back, insulted by the accusation despite the circumstances. "Those are David's men. They wear the crest of Ethelgard. I saw their carriage in the woods. Then he is tying up loose ends," Cale concluded grimly. He turned to Alara. "He knows you have the ring. He knows you realize his deception. He cannot allow you to live, Alara, not when you hold the true claim to Oakhaven. And if they find the Lady Lisa here..." He left the sentence unfinished, the implication hanging in the air like an executioner's axe. If David's men found the scorned fiancé alongside the secret heir, neither would leave Blackwood Keep alive. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm Lisa. The walls of the crypt seemed to shrink, pressing inward. She was a lady of the manor, trained in diplomacy, embroidery, and estate management. She had never faced the edge of a blade. Yet, as she looked at her sister, a stranger, yet a mirror of her own blood, a profound, illogical instinct to survive and protect flared within her chest. "There must be another way out," Lisa said, forcing her voice to remain steady. She closed her eyes, fighting the panic, dragging forth the countless hours she had spent in the grand library of Oakhaven. Blackwood Keep. It was built during the coastal wars. The architects always included emergency egresses for the ruling family in case of a siege. A sally port or a smuggler's run. Kyle looked at her, a flicker of genuine surprise cutting through his grim demeanor. "Are you certain?" "I have read the old architectural texts," Lisa insisted, stepping away from the stairs and moving deeper into the gloom of the crypt. The flickering torch cast long, dancing shadows over the cracked stone sarcophagi. It would not be marked. It would be hidden behind a false wall, likely near the oldest graves, where the bedrock meets the sea cliffs. "Show me," Kyle commanded, grabbing a torch from an iron sconce. The three of them moved hurriedly to the far end of the crypt. The air here was noticeably saltier, the dampness clinging to their skin like a second garment. Lisa ran her hands over the freezing, moisture-slicked stones of the back wall. Her fingers, accustomed to silk and velvet, scraped painfully against the rough masonry. She searched for a recessed brick, a hidden lever, an irregularity in the mortar. Above them, the heavy thud of boots grew louder. "Check the crypts," a voice bellowed from the top of the stairs. "Hurry," Alara pleaded, her hands trembling as she helped Lisa feel along the wall. "Here," Lisa gasped. Her fingers had caught on a deep groove, obscured by decades of moss and grime. She pushed with all her might, but the stone refused to yield. Cale shoved his sword back into its scabbard and wedged his broad shoulders against the section of the wall Lisa indicated. With a guttural grunt of exertion, he drove his weight forward. The ancient stone ground against the floor with a terrible, scraping groan that seemed loud enough to wake the dead around them. A narrow, pitch-black fissure opened in the masonry. "Go," Kyle ordered, shoving Alara through the gap. Lisa hesitated for a fraction of a second, looking back toward the staircase. The flickering light of the guards' torches was just beginning to spill into the crypt. If she ran, she was abandoning everything she had ever known. She was becoming a fugitive. But to stay was to die at the hands of the man who had promised her forever. She ducked into the darkness. Kyle followed, pulling the heavy stone doors shut behind them just as the first armed guard stepped onto the crypt floor. The stone ground shut with a muffled thud, plunging them into absolute suffocating blackness. The air in the tunnel was thick and smelled violently of brine and rotting seaweed. The roar of the ocean was suddenly deafening, reverberating through the narrow rock passage. Kyle struck a flint, lighting a small, oily rag he had pulled from his pack. The meager light revealed a treacherous, downward-sloping tunnel carved directly into the cliff's bedrock. "Keep a hand on the wall," Kyle instructed, taking the lead. "The stones are slick, and the tide is high. One wrong step, and the sea will claim you." Lisa followed, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could hear Alara's ragged breathing close behind her. They moved slowly, cautiously navigating the treacherous descent. The walls narrowed, forcing them to turn sideways in places, the cold, slimy rock catching on Lisa's fine woolen gown. Suddenly, her leather boots slipped on a patch of slick algae. Lisa pitched forward into the darkness, a startled cry tearing from her throat. Before she could strike the jagged rocks below, a strong, calloused hand shot out, gripping her forearm with iron strength. Kyle hauled her upright, pulling her flush against his chest to steady her for a brief, suspended moment. Lisa caught the scent of rain, leather, and sharp pine on his skin. He looked down at her in the dim light, his expression unreadable, but his grip was a grounding anchor in the terrifying dark. "Steady, my lady," he murmured, his voice surprisingly gentle beneath the roar of the sea. "We are almost through." They emerged from the suffocating darkness of the tunnel onto a narrow crescent of jagged black pebbles. The storm had fully broken over the coast, unleashing a torrential downpour that instantly soaked them to the bone. The wind howled like a wounded beast, whipping Lisa's dark hair across her face in stinging wet lashes. Before them lay the churning, slate-gray expanse of the sea, violently throwing itself against the base of the cliffs. There was nowhere to go but a shallow, recessed cave carved into the rock face by centuries of relentless tides. Kyle ushered them inside, far enough back to escape the biting wind and the reach of the highest waves. Exhausted, Lisa collapsed onto the damp, sandy floor of the cave. Her fine traveling dress was ruined, covered in mud, algae, and salt. Her hands were scraped and bleeding. Yet, as she stared out at the raging tempest, she felt an odd, terrifying sense of clarity washing over her, cold and sharp as the rain. Kyle moved swiftly, gathering whatever dry driftwood he could find deep within the recess. With practiced efficiency, he managed to coax a small, sputtering fire to life. The meager flames cast dancing, orange hues against the cavern walls, offering a pitiful but welcome illusion of warmth. Elara sat huddled on the opposite side of the fire, her knees pulled tight to her chest, her arms wrapped around herself as she shivered violently. She looked utterly broken, a stark contrast to the defiant, angry woman Lisa had encountered in the crypt. The silence stretched between the three of them, filled only by the crackle of the damp wood and the thunderous roar of the ocean outside. Lisa stared at the twin ruby ring, which she had stubbornly kept clutched in her hand throughout their harrowing escape. The gold band felt heavy, burdened with lies. Why did he want you dead? Lisa finally asked, her voice cutting through the ambient noise. She looked directly at her sister. The words still felt foreign in her mind, but the reality of it was undeniable. If David simply wanted the title, he could have kept you hidden. Why risk sending armed men to a ruined keep in the middle of a storm? Elara lifted her head, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. She swallowed hard, wiping rainwater and dirt from her cheek. Because I did not just leave Oakhaven with my life, she said softly. I took something from his solar, something he cannot afford to lose. From beneath the heavy, soaked folds of her cloak, Elara produced a leather satchel. Her fingers trembled as she unbuckled the strap and reached inside, pulling out a small, tightly rolled scroll sealed with dark purple wax. When I went to confront him in the solar before you arrived, he was distracted, Elara explained, holding the scroll out toward Lisa. He was reading this. He looked so panicked when I walked in, he hastily shoved it under a ledger. When he grabbed me, when you opened the door, I used the chaos to slip it into my sleeve. I thought it might be a love letter to you, a twisted way to torture myself. But when I read it, she trailed off, her voice thick with disgust. Lisa took the scroll. The purple wax bore the intricate seal of the royal treasury. She broke the seal, her hand surprisingly steady. As her eyes scanned the elegant, sweeping calligraphy, the breath left her lungs in a sharp rush. It was a letter addressed to Lord David from the King's Master of Coin. It detailed a complex, highly illegal arrangement. David was intentionally disrupting the trade routes that funded the Oakhaven estate, hiring mercenaries disguised as bandits to attack her father's merchant caravans. He was orchestrating the financial ruin of her family so that the Duke, desperate to avoid bankruptcy, would practically beg David to marry Lisa and merge their wealth. He wasn't just marrying me for the prestige, Lisa whispered, the parchment trembling in her hands as the horrifying truth settled over her. He was actively destroying my family to force our hand. He is a traitor to the crown. And a murderer, Kyle added, his deep voice resonating in the small cave. He stepped closer to the fire, looking down at the two women. If this reaches the king, David's head will adorn a pike on the city gates. He knows Elara took it. He knows she can destroy him. Lisa looked up at Kyle, truly seeing him for the first time. He was not a simple guard or hired blade. There was a noble bearing beneath the rugged exterior, an intelligence in his dark eyes that belied his rough appearance. Who are you? Lisa asked, her tone shifting from accusatory to curious. Why are you risking your life for her? Kyle hesitated, exchanging a brief, heavy look with Elara. My name is Kalen Vance, he said quietly. I was a knight of the King's Guard. I was stripped of my title and exiled when I discovered a plot within the court, a plot David was involved in. I have been hunting him for 2 years. When I found Elara searching for answers in the capital, I knew she was the key to bringing him down. Lisa looked back at the scroll, the damning evidence of a man she had thought she loved. The man who had kissed her hand and promised her a life of peace. Her sorrow over the broken betrothal evaporated entirely, replaced by a searing, white-hot fury. She looked at Alara, her sister, a victim of the same cruel manipulation. They were two halves of a fractured whole, bound by blood, betrayal, and a singular, terrifying enemy. "We cannot stay here," Lisa said, her voice ringing with a newfound, steely resolve that commanded the small space. She carefully rolled the scroll and tucked it safely into the inner pocket of her cloak. "We are not going to hide in the dark and wait for him to hunt us down." Ilara looked at her, wide-eyed. "What are you saying?" Lisa met her sister's gaze, the reflection in her eyes mirroring her own defiance. "I am saying we are going to the capital. We are going to find our father. And we are going to destroy Lord David." The journey to the capital was a grueling test of endurance. A stark departure from the plush velvet carriages and gentle ambling rides Lisa had known her entire life. With David's men scouring the coastal roads, Kyle deemed overland travel too exposed. Instead, they moved beneath the cover of darkness, navigating the treacherous cliffside paths until they reached a secluded smuggler's cove at dawn. There, using the last of the gold coins Lisa had secreted in her cloak, Kyle secured them passage on a flat-bottomed merchant barge carrying timber up the serpentine winding of the Silver Run River. The barge was cramped, smelling of raw pine sap and river mud, but it offered anonymity. They huddled beneath a heavy canvas tarp near the stern, listening to the rhythmic splash of the oarsmen and the distant calls of marsh birds. As the second night fell, wrapping the river in a thick, chilling fog, Lisa sat on a crate near the edge of the barge, watching the dark water slide past. The physical toll of the last few days was evident. Her once pristine gown was a tattered, mud-stained ruin. Her hands, previously soft and unblemished, were covered in stinging blisters and small cuts. Yet, as she looked at her reflection in the rippling water, she did not recognize the fragile, sheltered lady she had been. The fire that had ignited in the crypts of Blackwood Keep burned steadily in her chest, a quiet, enduring forge. "You should sleep, my lady." Kyle's voice was a low rumble, blending seamlessly with the ambient sounds of the river. He stepped out from the shadows of the stacked timber, his movements as silent as a ghost. He took a seat on the crate beside her, keeping a respectful distance, though the narrow space made it impossible to ignore the solid, reassuring warmth radiating from him. "I cannot," Lisa replied softly, her gaze remaining fixed on the mist. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the solar. I see David's face. I see the sheer arrogance of it all, the belief that he could simply rearrange our lives like pieces on a Saivas board." Kael leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. The faint moonlight caught the silver scar along his jawline, a testament to a life lived on the edge of a blade. Men like Lord David operate on the assumption that honor is a weakness, he observed quietly. They mistake kindness for frailty, but they invariably miscalculate. Lisa turned to look at him, her dark eyes searching his rugged features. "And what did he miscalculate with you, Kaelin Vance? You said you were a knight of the Kingsguard. Why did David want you ruined?" A heavy, contemplative silence settled between them. Kyle watched the fog for a long moment before answering. "I was assigned to guard the Royal Treasury's ledgers. I noticed discrepancies. Gold flowing outward to shell companies, funding mercenary bands that were disrupting trade in the Northern Territories, your father's territories. When I brought my findings to the captain of the guard, I was arrested the next morning for treason. Evidence had been planted in my quarters. David and the Master of Coin had orchestrated it perfectly. I was exiled, stripped of my name and my sword. But you kept fighting," Lisa murmured, a profound respect blooming in her chest. "I had nothing left but the truth," Kyle said, turning to meet her gaze. The intensity in his dark eyes made Lisa's breath catch slightly. "And now, neither do you. But the truth is a dangerous weapon, Lisa. When we reach the capital, we will be stepping into the viper's nest. David is a master manipulator. He will have the court eating from his palm. Then we will not play by his rules," Lisa said, a sudden, logical clarity crystallizing in her mind. "If he controls the outer court, we must bypass it entirely. You know the palace, Kale. You know the hidden paths, the servants' corridors, the blind spots of the Kingsguard." A slow, appreciative smile touched the corners of Kyle's mouth. "You are suggesting we break into the royal palace? I am suggesting we deliver this evidence directly to the king's magistrate before David even realizes we are within the city walls," Lisa countered, her chin lifting defiantly. "We do not ask for an audience. We force one." Kale studied her face, the moonlight casting soft shadows across her determined features. The air between them hummed with a sudden, electric tension, a shared understanding forged in the crucible of their survival. Slowly, he reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing a stray lock of damp hair from her cheek. The touch was achingly tender, a stark contrast to the harshness of their world. "You are a remarkably dangerous woman, Lady Lisa," Kyle whispered, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. Lisa did not pull away. Instead, she held his gaze, her heart beating a frantic, entirely new rhythm. "I am merely learning to survive," she replied softly. "And I am glad I do not have to do it alone." The great hall of the royal palace was a breathtaking testament to opulent power, a vast cavern of polished marble, soaring gilded arches, and towering stained glass windows that scattered jewel-toned light across the floor. Today, it was filled with the soft, murmuring hum of courtiers and minor lords, all gathered for the king's open petitions. Standing near the front of the raised dais, Lord David looked the very picture of a grieving, desperate nobleman. He wore mourning blacks, his handsome face drawn into lines of profound sorrow. Beside him stood Duke Reginald of Oakhaven, Lisa's father, looking aged and hollowed out by the sudden, inexplicable disappearance of his beloved daughter. "Your Grace," David spoke, his voice carrying perfectly across the silent hall, infused with a flawless, theatrical tremor. "I beg of the crown to double the patrols along the southern roads. It has been a week since my beloved Lisa was taken from Oakhaven. I fear she has fallen into the hands of the very bandits who have plagued the Duke's trade routes. I will pay any ransom, weather any storm, to see her return to me safely." The Duke placed a trembling hand on David's shoulder, a gesture of absolute, heartbreaking trust. "He speaks truly, Your Grace. The boy has not slept since the night she vanished." High above, hidden in the narrow, shadowed galleries reserved for the palace choir, Lisa watched the performance with a sickening knot in her stomach. Ilara stood beside her, her hands gripping the stone balustrade so tightly her knuckles were white. Behind them, keeping to the deepest shadows, stood Kale. "Look at him," Ilara hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Playing the martyr, playing the devoted son. He is digging his own grave," Lisa whispered back, her voice remarkably steady. She touched the breast of her cloak, feeling the crinkle of the wax-sealed scroll hidden within. They had used Kale's intimate knowledge of the guard rotations to slip through the crypts beneath the palace, bypassing the heavily fortified outer gates entirely. Now, they were directly above the king, the magistrate, and the man who had sought to destroy their family. "Are you ready?" Kyle asked softly, stepping closer to Lisa. She turned to him, taking a deep, fortifying breath. The terrified girl who had fled Oakhaven in the dead of night was gone. In her place stood a woman, forged in betrayal and tempered by the brutal reality of the world. I am. Lisa stepped out from the shadows of the gallery, moving to the edge of the carved stone railing. The great hall was vast, but the acoustics were designed to carry the slightest whisper. "Do not waste the crown's resources, Lord David." Lisa's voice rang out, clear, cold, and echoing with unyielding authority. "I am right here." A shocked gasp rippled through the assembled courtiers. Hundreds of faces turned upward, searching the high galleries. On the dais, Duke Reginald's head snapped up, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated shock. David froze, the mask of grief instantly shattering, replaced by a flash of genuine, visceral terror, as he locked eyes with the woman he thought dead. Lisa did not wait for the guards to react. With Kyle and Alara flanking her, she descended the grand spiral staircase that connected the gallery to the main floor. The crowd parted before them like water, murmuring in confusion at the sight of the ragged, mud-stained lady accompanied by a disgraced knight and a woman who looked like her mirror image. "Lisa!" the Duke cried, stepping forward, tears springing to his eyes. "By the gods, you are alive!" Before he could reach her, David intercepted, smoothly shifting his demeanor to one of frantic relief. "Lisa, my love, thank the heavens. Guards, seize this man." He pointed a shaking finger at Kyle. "He is a traitor. He must be the one who abducted her." The royal guards, recognizing Kyle, drew their halberds, stepping hesitantly forward. "Halt!" Lisa commanded, stepping sharply in front of Kyle, her voice echoing with the absolute authority of Oakhaven. The guards, confused by the conflicting orders, paused. Lisa turned her burning gaze upon David. "Do not dare speak to me of treason, David. You are the architect of this nightmare." David let out a forced, breathless laugh, looking toward the king's magistrate. "She is clearly delirious, Your Grace. The trauma of her captivity—" "I was not captive," Lisa interrupted, her voice slicing through his lies like a well-honed blade. She reached into her cloak and pulled out the scroll, the purple wax seal of the royal treasury gleaming in the ambient light. "I was hunting." She walked directly to the raised dais, ignoring David entirely, and presented the scroll to the king's magistrate. This document, bearing the seal of the Master of Coin, details a conspiracy to deliberately bankrupt the estate of Oakhaven. It details the hiring of mercenaries to attack our caravans, all orchestrated by Lord David to force a marriage and claim our lands. The hall descended into a deathly, suffocating silence. The magistrate broke the seal, his eyes scanning the elegant calligraphy. As he read, the color drained entirely from his face. He looked up, his gaze fixing heavily upon the Master of Coin, who was suddenly sweating profusely, and then upon David. "These are lies," David shouted, his voice finely cracking, panic bleeding through his aristocratic veneer. He lunged toward Lisa, abandoning all pretense. "Give me that!" Before David could take 2 steps, Kyle moved with the terrifying speed of a striking viper. He grabbed David by the collar of his mourning tunic, sweeping his leg out and slamming the young lord onto the polished marble floor. Kyle drew his long dagger, pressing the cold steel firmly against David's throat. "Stay down," Kyle whispered, his eyes dark with the promise of long-awaited justice. Lisa looked down at the man who had promised her the world, seeing nothing but a pathetic, cornered animal. She turned to her father, who was staring at the scene in absolute horror, and then gestured for Alara to step forward. "Father," Lisa said softly, the anger fading, replaced by a profound exhaustion. "There is much we need to discuss." starting with my sister. The autumn breeze sweeping through the high balconies of the Oakhaven estate carried the crisp, bittersweet scent of changing leaves. It had been 3 months since the confrontation in the great hall. A season of profound upheaval and quiet healing. Justice had been swift and brutal. Faced with undeniable proof, the master of coin had confessed, implicating David in a web of treason that stretched back years. David now awaited his final judgment in the darkest cells of the royal dungeons, stripped of his lands and titles. Caelan Vance, his honor completely restored by royal decree, had formally resigned from the Kingsguard, choosing instead a different path. Lisa stood near the stone balustrade, watching the sun dip low over the whispering woods, painting the sky in vibrant shades of bruised purple and fiery gold. The heavy, suffocating weight of duty that had pressed upon her shoulders for her entire life was gone, replaced by a light, unfamiliar sense of freedom. Footsteps sounded softly against the paving stones. Lisa turned to see Alara approaching. Her sister looked entirely different now. The rough, defensive edges had softened, replaced by a quiet, regal grace. She wore a gown of deep forest green, the silver crest of Oakhaven pinned proudly to her bodice. "Father is asking for you in the study," Alara said, coming to stand beside Lisa. "He wishes to go over the winter agricultural ledgers." Lisa smiled, a genuine, warm expression that reached her eyes. "You go, Alara. You have a much better mind for the numbers than I ever did. Besides, you are the heir to Oakhaven now. It is your duty to humor him." The revelation of Alara's true lineage had nearly broken their father. The Duke had wept, confessing his cowardice, his fear of a political scandal that had driven him to hide his firstborn child. The reconciliation was painful, fraught with decades of unspoken grief. But they were slowly forging a family from the shattered remnants of the past. Lisa had shocked the court by voluntarily stepping down as heir, formally acknowledging her older sister's birthright. "Are you certain you do not mind?" Alara asked softly, looking at Lisa with a lingering trace of protective concern. "This was your life, Lisa." "It was the life chosen for me," Lisa corrected gently. She reached out, clasping her sister's hand. On Alara's finger the ruby ring gleamed, no longer a symbol of betrayal, but a badge of surviving together. "I never wanted to manage the estate. I never wanted the politics. I only wanted peace. And I believe I have finally found it." Alara squeezed her hand, a silent communication of profound gratitude and sisterly love passing between them. "Don't keep him waiting too long," Alara said, with a knowing smile, nodding her head toward the garden below. Lisa followed her gaze. Standing near the ancient oak tree, bathed in the golden hour light, was Cale. He wore a simple leather tunic, his broadsword resting peacefully at his hip. He was looking up at the balcony, waiting for her. Alara turned and made her way back into the manor, leaving Lisa alone with the cool evening breeze. Lisa descended the sweeping stone staircase into the gardens, her heart fluttering with a light, joyous anticipation she had thought she would never feel again. When she reached the ancient oak, Kyle stepped forward. The hardened warrior of the Kingsguard looked entirely at peace. The perpetual tension in his shoulders finally relaxed. "The horses are saddled, my lady," Kyle said, his voice a low, warm rumble that sent a pleasant shiver down her spine. "The ship to the free city sails on the morning tide." "You are certain about this, Caelan?" Lisa asked, stepping closer to him, the proximity entirely intentional. "You could have had your rank back. You could have stayed at the palace." Cael looked down at her, his dark eyes filled with a soft, unwavering devotion. "I have spent my life guarding kings and cold stone walls," he murmured, reaching out to gently trace the line of her jaw. a mirror of the night on the river, but free from fear. I have no desire to return to a cage, even a gilded one. The world is vast, Lisa, and I wish to see it with you. Lisa leaned into his touch, a soft sigh escaping her lips. The scars of betrayal would always remain, a reminder of the darkness that lurked behind charming smiles. But as Cale leaned down, capturing her lips in a gentle, lingering kiss that tasted of wind and promises kept, Lisa knew she had survived the storm. She had lost a fiancé, but she had gained a sister, her freedom, and a love forged in the fires of absolute truth. As they pulled away, Lisa smiled up at the man who had pulled her from the dark. "Then let us go," she whispered, taking his hand. "Our adventure is just beginning." The betrayal Lisa faced was a devastating storm, but it cleared the path to a truth she never knew she needed. In losing the life that was orchestrated for her, she found the sister she was denied, the strength she never knew she possessed, and a love built on profound respect and shared survival. Sometimes, the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin right after the darkest ones end. If this emotional tale of betrayal, sisterhood, and resilience resonated with you, please leave a like, share this story with a friend who loves a good medieval drama, and consider subscribing for more cinematic, character-driven fiction. What would you have done in Lisa's place? Let me know in the comments below.